All right. Well, thanks for tuning into another episode of the WhyInfluence podcast. Today, we have a unique episode where we're talking with Jacob Southerland. He helps podcasts with getting sponsorships and strategies behind getting paid for doing a service of sharing their voice. So, first of all, I just want to say, Jacob, thank you for taking the time to come on as a guest today.
Absolutely, Jeremy, and thanks for inviting me. Flattered to be here and really excited.
Yeah. So, we've had a handful of conversations before, and your wisdom in the advertising space, sponsorship space for podcasting is definitely, very high up there in regards to people I've met. So I'd love to just, learn more about that from you and help share that with other people that have podcasts out there. So, I guess, what do you think would be a good way to start this conversation? Because it's not the normal format for me.
Great question, Jeremy. And there's so many ways to go about something of this nature, right? But just I'd say a little bit about me for everybody that we get in there, that we have here, if that's okay.
Yeah, for sure.
Jeremy, we probably met a year ago, right? Maybe 8 months ago, something.
I think we met at like a local meetup for podcasters.
Right, which I highly encourage for any of you listeners out there. There's local meetups, meet the community. But anyway, so met Jeremy about 8 months ago. And in the 8 months or since I've met him, I've been doing podcast sales really all over the board, Jeremy. And we've spoke about it many a times, but from the individual podcaster to these networks that you hear of, there's so many different ways that people monetize these shows. So many different ways that people get lost, quite frankly, Jeremy. Jeremy and I initially sat down after meeting at this meetup and just talked about, hey, what do these paying sponsors look for in a podcast? Jeremy, I think that'd be the perfect place to start here with our group. Okay.
Yeah.
So ultimately, guys, these guys want they want, Dadgummit, Jeremy, I'm losing my spot here, bud. You can edit this out, right? Or is this all live?
Here, it's live, so
no worries.
But here, how about this? So about how many podcasts have you now consulted with, roughly, just so we get an idea of, your...
Great. Thanks for leading me here. So ultimately, right now, I'm working with 20 different podcasts, okay, all across the board, some from just a consulting base, some from everyday ad sales, picking up the phone, hammering phones for them. In total, I've touched about 30 podcasts, but people go elsewhere. People find good opportunities from some big brands. So from a consulting standpoint, right now we're working with about 20 different podcasts.
Okay. And so what are some of the, I guess, pain points that you're seeing that people are having when they're transitioning from not doing anything to trying to get something started?
Well, yeah, the biggest question is, how do I get one of these sponsors, right? And there's so many different ways to go about it. But ultimately, these sponsors are looking for good quality content, Jeremy. It doesn't matter, 100 listeners, 1,000 listeners, 10,000 listeners. Yes, all that does play into the equation. But the first step is just finding good quality content. If you can put out content that you yourself would listen to, you're proud of, I'd say you're on the right step. You've got the first step. Now, Jeremy, there's a couple of more things that go into that, such as a broadcast schedule, things of that nature, which you and I have spoke about. All that stuff helps, right? So not only do you need good content, but you need good content that people know where to look for. They know when to look for, right? Another big thing at this point in time, Jeremy, is what they call syndicating, okay? Getting your podcast across all different mediums. Basically, you want a way for people to consume your podcast any which way. Like yourself, you've got your YouTube, you've got it on Apple. So anywhere somebody wants to listen to your podcast, they can consume it, right? Those are a couple factors that do play into that. And, quite frankly, that sponsors look for. Ultimately, Jeremy, a niche, I think when it comes to your content, you hear it time and time again, but a niche in podcasting is huge. Why do I say that? You've got almost 1 million podcasts out there. You've got 750,000 active podcasts today, Jeremy. Okay. There's been studies that say, only 250 grand have uploaded an episode in the last 3 months or something of the nature, but you've got 750,000 podcasts that are pumping out content, right? So you've got to find a way to separate yourself. You find your niche, you find what you specialize in, and you could probably talk, best about that.
All right. So you want, so an ideal candidate for getting a sponsor is going to be, it's not as big a deal to have 100, 1,000, 10,000 listeners as it is to have quality content that's really niched down into something that that you're good and passionate about. Because that's the main thing is that you'll listen to it, that it's a niche topic, which is obviously helpful for getting a sponsorship that's in that niche.
Absolutely.
Okay, so it's a good foundation.
And that's, I'd say that's the biggest reason you sector out that niche, Jeremy. Okay. It's tough when you say, hey, we're just going to go find a sponsor. Because quite frankly, my end on the ad sales, I can hammer phones all day long, but if the relationship doesn't make sense, Jeremy, they'll never tie the knot. Okay. So you find your niche as a content creator. I'll find the niche on the advertising side. So if your niche per se is BMX biking, well, hey, I'm going to Schwinn Bikes, and I'm no BMX biker by any means, so please don't peg me there. But you see what I'm saying? I'm going to bike manufacturers, and I'm saying, guys, this is where you need to be. My buddy Jeremy does a bike podcast, and he is the best in the business, right? That's why you sector out that niche. And when you do, Jeremy, that's when your 100 downloads or 1,000 downloads, that's when they don't matter as much, right?
Yeah. So you're saying that once you find your niche, once you have your niche, and once you've been doing it for a while, then you can make a list of maybe the kinds of businesses that you could see as being a sponsor for your show that's fitting with your platform, and then someone like you can help find a sponsor in that niche, or maybe someone can just do their own grind and literally just push and reach out and try to find someone in that niche to sponsor the show.
Right. So on the advertising side, Jeremy, we even take it one step further. Okay. So you find your niche and you are pumping out content, or you have a plan to pump out content, right? We have something that we can listen to. We actually build a profile for you. Okay. So we say, this is Amy, and Amy is a 35-year-old female. Amy is our consumer. She is 80% of our listenership, and this is what Amy likes to do. This is where you can find Amy on the weekends. This is what pulls Amy's heart, right? And then we take Amy and we sell Amy to those advertisers. Does that make sense to you, Jeremy?
Yeah. Okay. So you're creating an avatar as the ideal listener, or who the listener is of the show, and then you're sharing that avatar as the selling point.
Exactly. And essentially we took that. Our CEO is he's an old radio guy, right? So that's their P1 back in the day. Our P1 listener, our avatar, it's all the same, right?
Right. Yeah, that's a good idea. So you talked about how you've got this unique approach to the whole system here. Do you mind just high level going through what your unique approach is?
Yeah, that's a great question. So there's a lot of sources out there that can get you on a right start, right? Sorry, Jeremy, are you asking me, myself, like BG Podcast Network, how we would prospect potential sponsors for a show?
Yeah, I mean, the idea for this episode is to try to help other podcasters figure out how to get sponsorship for their show. So, I mean, they can either reach out to you, of course, or maybe get some ideas to do it on their own.
So do-it-yourself method, number one, I'd say look at Magellan. Okay, Magellan gives out great reports, monthly reports as to who's spending money on podcasts. They'll give you different podcasts that they have sponsored prior to. So, if you have ZipRecruiter, you type that in, and they'll show you everyone that ZipRecruiter's ran an ad on. Okay. Fairly inexpensive service, Jeremy. I want to say, less than $50 a month, but that'll give you a good idea of folks to contact yourself. Okay. Another great way to get started. Let's say, you don't want to get out there and you don't want to reach out to all these individual companies and say, hey guys, sponsor me, right? Not everyone loves it, Jeremy, but per inquiry ads, we've all heard it. They're available to anyone that is pumping out content. And essentially, guys, you're paid on what you sell for that company. It's a great way for a lot of people to get started. And yeah, you may not be able to quit your day job today, but it's always great to have an extra $50-100 hit the bank, on a random Tuesday. So that's another great way to get started. But ultimately, Jeremy.
And what's that called again?
So that would just be a per inquiry ad, right? There's a lot of folks that do it. I'd say Airtime Media is a big one that does it. You'll see a lot of entities themselves do it, right? Like I know for a fact ZipRecruiter does a per inquiry basis. So basically you run the ad. If someone follows your link, which you hear many times on podcasting, go to ziprecruiter.com/Jacob. They follow your link, they sign up, and you actually get a hire off ZipRecruiter. That is when your podcaster would get paid. A little work goes into that on the consumer side, Jeremy, but it's a great way out there if you have no ads to, hey, maybe link a couple $100 here or there just off people wanting to promote your show. There's plenty of stats out there that show podcast listeners love to support their hosts, right? They know most of us don't do this full time. Most of us don't, make millions and millions of dollars off of this. So, they go the extra mile to support that individual host. That's the idea of that per inquiry spot. And it tends to work a lot better on podcasts than it would per se on radio, television, which you see them there, Jeremy. You just don't know. But I promise you, ESPN runs per inquiry spots at times. Okay.
All right. And those are like ads that you don't necessarily need to get, permission. As it's not as hard to get permission to run the ad. Like you can like apply on their website and then get approved, and then just you use that affiliate link.
Exactly. So the per inquiry spots usually open to all. The only reason that they would kind of scale back is just bandwidth on their side. Hey, we've had a lot of inquiries about the per inquiries. We can't set you up a link. Give us a month. We'll get it set up. It's great advertising for them. It's great brand recognition for them per se. And for you, it's a good chance to, make a couple bucks off some content that you're already putting good time into.
Okay.
Now, the version that we do here at BG Podcast, right? A little bit more laborious, Jeremy. Little less fun, just to be quite frank, right? But, ultimately the fun in this is monetizing those podcasts and making those hosts, happy with the product that they do, right? Pick up the phone, man. Jeremy, that's ad sales 101 right there. Okay. You want to work for Casper? Call Casper, right? If you want to work for, My Pillow, call My Pillow. So that process, no one loves, right? But it does pay off. And a couple success stories I'll share with you, Jeremy. Liberty Health Share, okay? Never thought of podcasting, had no idea what podcasting was. First call here at BG when we spoke with them. I've got a host that kind of falls in their, in their P1 or in their avatar, who they're trying to sell to with his podcast. It's Rebel Parenting. And basically, he targets Christians, usually females, about 35 to 55. And typically the decision maker in the household. Liberty Health Share, the two avatars met up exactly. So based off of some of those principles, hard work and calling people left and right, finally hooked somebody up with Rebel Parent and Ryan Dobson, introduced them to podcast advertising. They've doubled down. He's now fully monetized, right? It took 6 months, Jeremy, 6 months of me and a couple other salesmen hammering phones for this guys. Now, I'm not going to tell you I did that every single day, 24 hours for 6 months, right? But, we put a lot of time into that. The proof's in the pudding, right? On the back end, when I got to call Ryan and say, hey, Ryan, I know we've been working together for 6 months and, we've been just barely scraping by on your podcast. You've been, fighting tooth and nail to monetize it. But we're good. We've got it paid for now forever, as long as you want to do it. Now, Ryan's a little different. Ryan's father was a broadcast host, a radio guy, so a couple extra selling points for him. But it can happen to anybody, Jeremy. We both know it. We've both seen it. Just pick up the phone and tell the folks, hey, guys, I believe in this content. This is who listens, and you should give it a shot.
Right. Yeah, that's great. All right. So you want to, position yourself to be a good fit for a sponsor, and then you want to identify and reach out to sponsors. And you talked about Magellan, which is
right,
a website you can go to see who's sponsoring podcasts.
Exactly.
And then you can get a per inquiry ad, or you can just pick up the phone and literally just cold call or cold email and reach out to people that you think would be a good fit to sponsor your show.
Jeremy, that's the most rash, right? Like I said, also the most laborious process, but it works. Ultimately, that's the best way to get somebody's attention. You pick up the phone and tell them, I want to work for you, right? They may not buy it today. A lot of times what we say around here, Jeremy, though, is if somebody buys today, they're going to drop you tomorrow. Okay. First call. You've got to work through that. You've got to build a relationship with these folks. Keep pushing that out there. Even if they tell you that first phone call, hey, we're good on podcast advertising. Who cares? Send them weekly updates, add them to your newsletter, blow these guys up and let them know you're out there. They'll recognize you.
All right. Yeah. So, keep hitting them multiple touch points.
Multiple touch points. Yes, sir. And Jeremy, as many touch points as you can get, quite frank. Most of the time, the biggest problem here is when we go that route, right? When we go just, hey, let's hammer phones all day. Who do we talk to? That's usually the hardest step of the entire process, Jeremy. Once you know who to talk to, then it's easy. Then you just send them the update to your podcast. You just send them, hey, here's our new episode. Check it out, right?
Yeah, that's great. Here we've got Dylan. He asked where you dudes from. We're both here in Atlanta right now.
Dylan, I probably sound like I'm from far more South Georgia, but yeah, believe it or not, I'm from Atlanta.
All right, so once you get your podcast positioned, you have your avatar, you've identified sponsors. How do you add value to the sponsor? Like, what are some advice that you have for saying, hey, I've got 100 listeners. Like, how am I going to get someone to pay for this podcast? Like, what are some ways that you can sort of up the value of your podcast?
Great question, Jeremy. And I would, I'd never limit it, right, to just 100 listeners, right? Think of where you promote it, guys. Think of, who asked you about it, right? I'd say Facebook, Twitter, Instagram, that's all added value, right? You got 5,000, 2,000 friends on Facebook that followed you from high school. Well, hey, are you going to post your podcast there? There you go. You're turning 2,000 eyes towards that podcast. Are they going to listen? We can't guarantee that, but we're going to put you out there, right? That's a huge one to leverage. Quite frankly, show notes, Jeremy. I'd say show notes are great added value. You can always leave links. I think real hardcore podcasters love show notes, right? You can leave links to those advertisers, forever links that will direct them to their page. Depending on where you are, right? A lot of your smaller podcasts per se, we will have forever ads or embedded ads that will never change. That's a huge added value on the front end, sir. I'm selling this at introductory rates. When I say introductory rates, I'm selling it, $10, $15 an episode, right? But it's going to be there forever. So if I do strike gold, it's still going to be there, right? And a lot of podcast listeners love to listen to those early on episodes. So those early on episodes could be highly valuable if you have the right buyer on the other end.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. All right. Well, what else comes to mind? Or maybe let's talk about a bigger podcast that's getting tens of thousands of downloads per episode. Like, what are some methods that they're doing?
Sure. Yeah. So we work with a few podcasts that really do, crank in the downloads, a couple 100,000 downloads. When you talk weekly or, 10, 15, 20,000 downloads on one specific episode. A lot of those, Jeremy, do start, or at least my process with them started very similar, right? Build that avatar, yada, yada, build a broadcast schedule. Once you find the sponsors, someone of that nature, it usually tends to sell itself, Jeremy. Podcast listeners, they do the work for us. They respond, they promote their own podcast host. So something of that nature usually tends to sell itself. And if it's category specific or niche down, a lot of times we don't have to call out. Got a guy, Weird Darkness, voiced by Darren Marler in Chicago. No longer am lucky enough to work with him, but he was to the tune of 750,000 downloads a month, cranking out episode after episode. Had people calling me left and right about Darren. I was just lucky to be a part of that equation. But once you build up everything that we've spoke about, that broadcast schedule, that additional content, that added value for those sponsors, then it seems to roll in, right? There's a reason Rogan's making multi-million dollars doing podcasting, right? Once you perfect your craft and you are niche down, your advertisers are going to find you.
Right. So when you're selling those early episodes in a smaller podcast, you're saying that you've got these like forever links, and the value for that is the fact that they're getting it early because people can go back and listen to those early episodes when the podcast gets bigger, but also maybe like SEO reasons, like they're getting more backlinks coming to their
Absolutely.
website.
Absolutely. And I'm no SEO whiz by any means, but backlinks, we all know that boosts your SEO presence. Ultimately, you're going to have people touch that page. We all know that podcast listeners love those early on episodes. It's proven that, your first 10 episodes, whether or not they're going to listen to 1 through 30, they're going to go back and listen to those early episodes, right? So an early on small podcast, that's a huge selling point, guys, is I'm going to have a forever link here. Whether I make it or not, it's out there on the dark, on the web, and people can go directly from my content to your page. I'd say that's huge.
That is huge. Yeah, I know that a lot of small podcasts struggle to negotiate with, adding the value or explain the value that they have that they can give because they may not have listeners.
Exactly. And then, Jeremy, I'll throw this out of left field. One thing that podcasting has done is it's hit the radio industry hard, right? And we continue to do so. And it's not that podcasters are looking to overtake the radio. There's just so much audio that you can consume, right? So with this being said, we found a great way to promote your own podcast, promote yourself. You may have to give or take on an ad or two, is to reach out to those radio stations, say, hey, Sunday morning, you don't have any content to play, or you're playing national content. Check this out, right? Used to, folks would go on and they would rent airtime from the radio stations. Well, that's no longer a thing with podcast. So take your podcast and try to promote it with that local media outlet.
And have you seen success with that?
Absolutely. I've got, so we work with Southern Gospel News podcast. I'm not a Southern Gospel News fan per se, but it is the largest Southern Gospel News podcast in America. And the way that we promoted it was with those small market Christian radio stations. Saturday morning, they're usually booked up Sunday morning, but Friday afternoon, just holes in their spot where they're looking for stuff to play. They're dragging on, they're recreating old episodes. Well, hey guys, we've got the #1 podcast right here. Or at the time, we've got a podcast with 800 listens a month. We promote it there. We start playing it there. Now we're sitting at, I want to say for the first year of the Southern Gospel News podcast, about 350,000 downloads.
Wow. And you attribute a lot of that success to being on those news channels.
Absolutely. And it's quite frankly, Jeremy, it's anywhere you can get it out there,
All right. So let's talk a little bit about the ads themselves. How does, there's pre, mid, post roll, putting links in the descriptions. Like what are all the offerings that people are putting out there?
Right. So the traditional setup, exactly as you stated, pre, mid, post. With audio, it's usually a 15, 30, or 60-second clip. With podcasts, we've kind of changed every bit of that, right? People do post-read, live endorsements. People do candid, pre-cut 30, 60, 15-second spots. It's really with what you're comfortable with, Jeremy. I'd say test your audience as well, guys. There's some great analytics on Apple, and you can actually see where people bounce when people, shut down the podcast. If you do a 2-minute live read and you see that, you lost 10% of your following, maybe that's a great time to say, hey, we're only going to do 60-second ads, or we're only going to do 15-second ads. Some audiences are highly receptive, right? You don't see that bounce rate at all. So at that point, I would consider ramping it up, maybe 2 mid-roll ads, right? There's no, there's no set way, right? It's hard for me to tell somebody, hey, you need to have 3 ads on your podcast. If your audience is receptive to 20 ads and you can sell 20 ads, then put 20 ads on your podcast. If your audience is receptive to one, host read 3-minute spot, then that's where you want to go. But allow your audience to tell you just by trial, right?
All right. And how would you how would you ask the audience, and how would you get feedback on that? Because a lot of people struggle with hearing from their podcast listeners, because it's not like you can see a comment from the show. Like, you really got to get them off the podcast platform to hear that feedback. So what do you see that people are doing that's been successful for getting feedback like that?
So ultimately, I leave it all up to the stats, and I know the stats aren't 100%. I'm sure there's going to be one-offs, but bounce rate is a huge statistic. Jeremy, and let's take it outside of advertising for a second. Let's just take it back to your content. If your bounce rate seems to increase 25% or 50%, 15 minutes into your episode, then you should seriously consider just creating a 15-minute episode, right? You want those people listening, and you want them consuming every bit of your content. That translate over to the advertising side. So, if an ad runs at 3 minutes in and then everyone shuts off your podcast and you see that on your bounce rate, then you don't want to run an ad at 3 minutes in. You see where I'm going?
Yeah.
So ultimately, I leave that up to the stats. I have seen hosts such as Darren Marlar, who I spoke about earlier. He's great about connecting with his community, but that's all just hard work. I mean, you really have to put it out there. You've got to be engaging on that Facebook page. You've got to put out posts that people want to respond to, and you've got to be responsive when they respond. That itself, connecting with your audience, I'd say could be another part-time job,
Yeah, for sure. So when you're saying that you're looking at the bounce rates, you're looking in Apple?
Exactly.
Okay. I've actually never jumped in the Apple Analytics.
I'll send you a video of how to get to them, Jeremy, or even just send you the link and let you kind of feel around. I love Apple Analytics because they do show some of that those one-offs. They show basically how long people are consuming, different types of consumption. Bounce rate is my biggest go-to reason for Apple.
Okay. Yeah, and I'll make sure to add the link that you send me to the show notes of this episode, so anyone listening can get that link and check out Apple Analytics for themselves. Cool. So if you don't mind, listeners here, they know my podcast, WhyInfluence,
Sure.
And you're somewhat familiar of it. So could we walk through like a case study scenario? Like if let's say, I was looking to get a sponsor for the show, where you'd start to, walk through like a case study?
All right. Yeah, absolutely. So, basically we do a lot of what we just spoke of, Jeremy. I think it all starts with that initial conversation. And I would get, a lot of, hey, how many are you pumping out? What type of content are we talking to? Who are we talking to? We'd build all that together, and then I'd talk about, who would you want to get with? Because Jeremy, there's a lot of times where I reach out to a company and they may like your content, but you may not like what that company stands for, right? So I start to get tips from you, okay? And then I do the hard work. Me and my guys here at the office, we do what we love to do, and we get on the phones and we really start hammering down that path. Whether or not it's the initial 10 companies that you tell me you want to work for, usually it's not, but they're usually within that sector. So just a good case study to put out there. Keep It Weird podcast. Okay. Two young ladies out of Los Angeles, great host, Lauren and Ashley. They tell weird, spooky stories. It was outside of almost anything I had worked with aside from Weird Darkness. And they actually called BG Podcast and just said, guys, we think we have a really good listener base. We want to try to start making some money off this. We're not trying to quit our jobs. We're just trying to make a couple $100 a month. I've got a new baby on the way. And, ultimately, if I'm going to spend time on this, I want to get paid for it in one way or fashion, right? So working with Lauren and Ashley, I could tell that they love their content. We were far from actually getting to where we needed to be to sell this thing. They were producing an episode on a Monday, an episode on a Friday. Ultimately, we got them a good broadcast schedule together. Once a week, started getting, people to start looking for that episode at that right time. They promoted internally. They're pretty good about promotion on their side with just their local touch points. we were able to get them with FabFitFun. FabFitFun was not a sponsor they told us they originally wanted. It was a monthly subscription box. But FabFitFun, after just hammering phones, I'd say for about 2 months, we connected them with them. The ladies got their boxes, okay, which they love the decor. If we have any female listeners, FabFitFun's got some great stuff to wear, I guess. But, the ladies were getting paid for. They were getting their time paid for. That's ultimately what they wanted to do, Jeremy. That's probably one of our biggest success stories within the last couple months, just because it's fresh. And, ultimately we're just here to make people happy, get them where they want to be, whether it's making $1,000 a month or, just paying for your time.
All right. So if you don't mind sharing some details on like what sponsorships are worth or what people are getting, maybe like a couple examples hypothetically for like a type of niche and what that niche could expect for the kind of listeners, or some kind of base that helps people be able to assess like, okay, I've got this kind of podcast, this kind of listener, and I should be somewhere around this based off your experience.
Absolutely. So I'd say there's a good range. There's a cost per thousand, I'd say, model that many buyers today that are in the podcasting space work off of. Usually, midroll or something, you can get around $25 cost per thousand. Guys, give or take a little bit, anywhere from 15 to 40. But Jeremy, I never limit a show, right? It's niche down. You've got a select audience. You've got a select audience that speaks to your buyer. A lot of times if you are going that laborious route that I spoke of and picking up the phone and saying, hey, I want to work for you, what's it worth to you, right? Jeremy, you know what your time's worth at the end of the day. What's my content worth to you? See if it aligns with your time. See if it aligns with, with your worth. Now, I'd say the CPM model is a great way to start, a great way to base. But if I worked by the CPM model, Jeremy, I probably wouldn't be working anymore. I'd probably be out of business. Got shows that bring in 1,000 listeners a month, make $1,000 a month. Got shows that bring in 50,000 listeners a month that make $1,000 a month. You see what I'm saying, Jeremy? Ultimately, it's going to be getting with the right buyer and getting them a product that touches them. If they like your content, they're going to buy it.
All right. So it's not as much about the listeners. It's more just about your positioning, the niche that you're in, how you sell it to the sponsor. Like it's sort of just a Wild West in a way, just sort of, what luck of the draw, positioning, just a combination of a lot of different things.
Jeremy, you highlighted it perfectly there. It's the Wild West of advertising. There's models like we spoke, the CPM model. Sure, if you want to follow it, by all means. It's not necessary. If you follow the CPM model, you're probably selling yourself short, ultimately.
All right. And based on the people you're working with, what are they like, maybe percentage wise? Like, we talked about there's a pre-post, mid-roll, host could read something. Like, what are you finding is maybe like the majority method that people are doing, or is it just all across the board?
Ultimately, I like to leave that up to the show host, to that content producer. But I'm going to give you recommendations, right? I'm going to be following those statistics, and I'm going to say, hey, we need to double down on ads, or we need to trickle back. They're not very receptive, right? At the end of the day, Jeremy, it's hard for me to come in and say, hey, yeah, I'm going to help you monetize this thing and completely change your content. I'm not here to do that. It's your content. You're going to have the final say on any ad. You're going to have the final say on any ad placement. I'm just going to give you, hey, if you do X, Y, and Z, the listeners are going to be more receptive, and the payers, your buyers are going to be more receptive. But ultimately, Jeremy, it's your content.
All right. And do you have like something that's generally more receptive, like maybe in the early part, the host reading it or saying at the end? Like, is there certain parts that work better?
So I found they're different for different placements. For your pre-roll, quite frankly, I like a nice 15-second, brought to you by spot. You can go into more, you can go into a 30-second. I would be very wary of a minute or longer than a minute long host read ad on the front end of your content, just because you want to get the people listening, especially if it's a first time listener, Jeremy. You want to get them hooked in. That mid roll is really where you can pretty much have free reign. Okay. I've seen hosts take a break in the content. Hey guys, for a second, we're going to go to our sponsors and run a 5-minute advertising roll, right? On the ad side, usually not as valuable for the buyer, just because they are clumped in there with other ads. People can skip through those ads. But you have a lot of free reign in that mid roll. You can break your content up. You can do just one 1-minute ad. You can do 3 30-second ads. I'd say try to keep your mid-roll break, if you're going to do a complete break, to 2 minutes. You don't want to oversaturate, but 2 minutes gives you a good time to get 1 to 2 ads in there. If you're really pumping out ads or pumping in ads to your podcast per se, I think 2 ads during that mid-roll spot is prime time. And typically you can sell the mid-roll for a little bit more because that's when your listeners are most engaged, right? They're most hooked in. And then that post-roll, I'd say once again, you can go up to a minute on that post-roll. That's usually going to be your least valuable spot, right? You get to the last minute or 2 of an episode, you're pulling up to your office, you may cut it off short. So that's typically how those spots shake out, if that's what you're going for there, Jeremy.
Yeah, that's great. I like that. What I jotted down while you're saying it, just to recap for people, because it went pretty fast, was
sure.
Like a pre-roll could be like a brought to you by for like 15 seconds. You definitely don't want to go over a minute there.
Right.
In the mid-roll, you can sort of pause the conversation. Hey guys, for a second, we're going to go to our sponsors. And then you have sort of free reign to play there. Maybe ideal is 2 minutes, but up to like you've heard of 5 minutes. And then post-roll is maybe a minute. It's less valuable. Not as important. But one thing I did wanted to follow up with when you said that is you're talking about having 2 1-minute ads as part of the mid roll. So you're finding that podcasts are having more than one sponsor on a particular episode.
Right. Yeah. I think a good indication of this, if you want to tune in, Rebel Parenting does a great job of it. He doubles down on that mid roll ad, and it's honestly just one more spot to sell.
Okay.
So, it's more income for you. It's more income for me. And as long as your audience, isn't too turned off by it, as long as we don't see that bounce rate crank up, then, we may even look at doing 3 here in 3 months, Jeremy. It's just a matter of, what the audience is comfortable with.
Okay. Yeah, that's great. Is there anything that we haven't covered that's coming to mind for you?
Jeremy, I think one of the coolest things that we're doing here at BG Podcast, and one of the things that I would challenge really anybody, because it's only going to push this industry, reach out to those local media outlets, right? I hinted at the radio. I think that's a great place to get your content pushed out there. And guys, they are hurting for content, just to be quite frank. I myself, Jeremy, we're starting to produce our first branded podcast here at BG. And we're doing it with a local newspaper. So, there's ways, guys, that we can leverage this podcast medium that we have to get us far more influence, to tie on your points, Jeremy, than we ever imagined. And, we're just in the beginning stages of really podcast growth. So it'll be amazing to see, kind of where it's placed in 5-10 years if I've got people all over the country doing this, right?
Right. All right. So but before I open the floor for you to talk about maybe the best way to reach out to you and stuff, do you have any last words for the listeners today for, let's say, how they should be thinking about it, maybe the first steps that they should be taking, just any last words for them?
Right. I mean, ultimately, guys, if you want to do ad sales, okay, it's a totally different ball game, right? You've really got to just, put your head to the grindstone and work hard at it. If you don't want to do ad sales, guys, and you really just want to produce your content, ask somebody else to help you. Ultimately, there's people that love, cold calling and tracking down advertisers for you, and I'm one of those guys. And there's people that would pull their hair out doing it, right? If you do fall into one of the in that category that would pull your hair out, don't go about it, guys, because it's not fun. Your touch point, you're going to get 2% of people on the phone. It is a long, hard process, and you've got to love what you're doing to even sniff it, right? I don't want to discourage you, though. Go try it for a month. Go call everyone that you want to work for and tell them, guys, I have great content. Put it out there. Believe in your content. And, who knows? You may be better than me. You may get somebody on your first call and it may get monetized. Don't be afraid to put it out there. Ultimately, that's where I'll leave it, Jeremy. And if you want to reach me, you can always just call me directly. 704-995-3315. That's the easiest way to get in touch with me. I'm a phone guy.
Can you text that number too?
You can text it. You can call it. If you want to email me, you can, but call me on the phone.
All right. What's the number again?
704-995-3315. Best way to get in touch with me. And I'm Jacob Southerland with BG Podcast Network.
Awesome. Well, I appreciate you coming on today and sharing so much value with us. There's a lot of people out there trying to figure out how to monetize their podcasts. And I think that you shared a ton of insight today, and hopefully it's valuable to people so they can go get their own, or if they're, frustrated or don't want to do that, they can reach out to you and get it done for them.
Absolutely. Well, it's the Wild West. Have a good one, Jeremy. And thanks for your time, brother.
All right. Yeah, you too. All right. And thanks again for listening, everybody. I appreciate you taking the time to listen to the WhyInfluence podcast today. I look forward to seeing you in the next one.